All right. Thank you, everybody. We are very happy to be here to work with the ACE Mentor program for fire protection and emergency management. We hope everybody's been enjoying their projects thus far, and they've gotten a wealth of knowledge in some of the other disciplines that have been presented to you. We're here to talk with you about some rather unique aspects of building and organizational structure for when things don't go well. When we have to have an emergency, whether it be fire, life safety, or any other emergency. There's some unique aspects of the overall built environment that go into protecting you, protecting me, protecting everybody in our society as we go through. So thank you very much. And real quickly, um, we're from Jensen Hughes. Now, Jensen Hughes is an engineering firm and consulting firm. We are around the world. We are the leading offers of consulting in over 100 countries worldwide. Our experts, we lead the fire protection engineering industry as well as advancing the science of safety throughout the world. Anything that deals with life safety or risk, we try to use our expertise to help mitigate and solve problems. Our presenters for you today, myself, I'm on the right there. I'm Eric Babcock. I'm the director for the Southeast region. I'm here locally in Cary. Um, I've been a fire protection engineer now for 20 years, and I've been graduated from the University of Maryland in 2000, and really excited to share my knowledge with you on how we protect buildings from fire and help mitigate it when fire does happen. And I've brought along with me here Bobby Baker. He is the service line leader for our firm in healthcare and emergency management. Bobby, if you'd like to give a quick background on yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Eric. Good morning. I'm Bobby Baker, as Eric mentioned. I bring to the table for Jensen Hughes over 30 years in the first responder and emergency management background. Worked for all kinds of different organizations, healthcare, education, and even the Department of Homeland Security for a while. Looking at emergency management and fire and many other things is what I've done for the majority of my career, and hopefully bringing that to the table and sharing some of that information today.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, our goals for this meeting will be to have an introduction to fire protection engineering discipline and the principles of emergency management. We're going to identify, explain the operation of core fire protection systems within buildings, and then we'll identify fire protection requirements outside of buildings, followed by the principles of emergency management, how this is executed during an emergency with a case example, and how to discuss fire protection emergency management relative to your projects. So what is fire protection engineering? Quote here is from University of Maryland. So it's the use of math and science and sound engineering principles to solve the problem of unwanted fire so we can protect people, property, and the environment. But why? Okay, why is fire protection important? Well, last year in the United States, 2 years ago for 2021, here's the statistics for you. 1.35 million fire responses. That's how many times the trucks rolled out of the firehouse. 3,800 civilian deaths, 14,000 injuries, 70 firefighter deaths, and almost 16 billion in property damage. Those are pretty impressive numbers and something that definitely is worth ensuring that we try to mitigate in the future. But is a fire a bad thing? Instructors, if you'd like to pause here and take a moment to discuss. What do you think fire is and how it impacts your life? So hopefully you had some good brainstorming discussions. If you didn't pause, then we can just keep moving forward. But fundamentally, fire, when used properly, is a very important part of the world and the built environment that we have. You use it for heating your home. You use it for cooking your food. There's plenty of wonderful uses for fire. It fundamentally changes our world. However, fire protection engineering deals primarily with unwanted fire conditions, as we saw in the quote from University of Maryland. So what is an unwanted fire condition? Obviously, it's any time where it could be destructive. But how do you get that unwanted condition? Well, fire occurs when four conditions are present: heat, fuel, oxygen, And then the chemical chain reaction that propagates this action on and on and on and on till one of these are removed, where the fire burns out because the fuel has been removed because it's been all burnt away. The heat is removed because of suppression systems. Oxygen is removed also from suppression systems, or the chemical chain reaction is interrupted. This is called the fire tetrahedron, and we are fundamentally bound by it in the practice of fire protection engineering. But where can fire occur? Obviously, we've seen many buildings on fire, unfortunately. Wildfire, this is definitely a present aspect happening more and more in our world. We have it in our homes, unfortunately. And then it can even happen in zero gravity. It just acts very differently without the force of gravity to change how fire works. So the principles of fire protection, we have detection, notification, and suppression. For detection, we have smoke detection. The top one on the top left is probably something you've seen before. The other one is a VESDA. It's an air sampling smoke detection system where you take particles of combustion that are sampled through the air and it's run through an analyzer to detect it very early. We have heat detectors, which just go based upon a temperature or how fast a room can increase in temperature. We have video detection. And then, of course, manual fire protection. I'm sure everybody has seen manual pull stations. Definitely not something you pull unless you actually see fire. But sometimes the human nose can be even more detective than any of the sensors we put out there. On the notification side, after detection happens, we then go to notification, where we have strobes and horns. The strobes are provided not only to get your attention, but to provide a means of alerting to those who might be hard of hearing or deaf. We have bells. This bell also happens to have a strobe on the bottom of it. There are speakers. There's plenty of voice fire alarm systems where you actually have a voice talking to you, telling you what to do. And then in today's day and age, we have phone notifications that all can be made from the fire alarm system. Then after it's been notified, we typically have suppression to be worried about, where we have standard sprinklers, which spray water on fire and is very different than what you may have seen in any movies or in what Hollywood tells you. Almost all the times, fires can put out by one sprinkler and one sprinkler only, maybe two. But the lighting a lighter up to a sprinkler and letting the whole building start flooding with water is completely fiction. Then you have fire extinguishers. And then you have, in some cases, you have for your projects, potentially, if you have a cooking area within your project, you would have a residential fire sprinkler system because, a commercial cooking fire extinguishing system where you would spray a chemical agent onto a grease fire. I hope everybody knows never put water onto a grease fire at home. And then we move into a fire alarm. So how does fire alarm work? Well, you detect smoke, then through a wired or wireless pathway, it goes back to a control panel for processing. After the computer processes the input, it gives the output requirements to the notification system, which then leads us, the people in the building, to evacuate or in some cases protect in place. Now, where would we protect in place? We protect in place in things like hospitals where people are too ill to move, or potentially in a detention center where people need to be stayed controlled and not allowed to just freely egress a building. So how do you detect a fire? So the fire alarm detectors, they sense combustion products and fire characteristics within their housing and a lot of times through different computer analog-based processes. So what products of combustion are detected? We have heat, light, particles, and sound. The heat, light, particles, and sound all give you the different aspects. Sometimes the detectors will detect one, two, or even all of these different particles of combustion. Now on to suppression. How can we suppress a fire? Now let's remember the fire tetrahedron. We want to remove one of those components and we suppress the fire. So if we sprinkler and cool the fire, we wet the surrounding combustibles, we take away the heat and we take away the fuel. If we have a gaseous system, we lower the oxygen content or potentially interrupt the chemical chain reaction. We remove those pieces from it. And then fire extinguishers also many times will cool, they'll smother, and maybe remove oxygen, and you can get rid of all of them. But what goes into a sprinkler system? Because that's primarily what you're going to have in your buildings for this project. So a sprinkler system starts out at the city main, which hopefully in a different discipline, the civil engineering discipline you've talked about. The city main connects to a public fire hydrant that the fire department will use when they roll their truck up to connect to. But we have to have a main valve, a backflow prevention device, which keeps any water that's in this sprinkler system from contaminating the city. You have a main post indicator valve, which tells the fire department that the valve is open and water is flowing into the building. And then you have underground fire line. You can have a private hydrant if need be. And then you come up and you have your main building control valve, a water flow switch. A water flow switch is a little flapper inside of the pipe that when the water flows through it, it tips over, alerts trips the signal, and tells you that water is actually flowing. That's a very important piece of information for firefighters. And then you have your alarm bell. This goes up to a distribution network of piping based upon what's called hydraulic calculations, where you want to calculate the water flowing through the pipe to make sure that at the very end, you have enough pressure to spray water out of the sprinkler. If you get to the end and there's enough water pressure, it doesn't really do you any good. Very basics of a sprinkler system for you to plan into your buildings. Now I have a quick video just to give everybody a good sense of sprinkler systems and what they can do. So we can see we have a fire in the building. Hopefully everybody can hear that smoke detector going off, how fast that happens. And then you can see how fast fire moves up the curtains. That is a sprinkler with a cover plate on it. The heat makes the cover plate fall off and activates the sprinkler, which then begins to wet the combustibles and suppress the fire. In the image below, you don't have a sprinkler, and you can just see how the fire progresses all the way through the floor. Everybody, hopefully you can see you have a smoke layer. This is why you're told to get on the ground and crawl when you have a fire happening, because you need to be able to crawl away. Hopefully everybody can see the differences here of what happens. Drastically different conditions as the bottom one is approaching what's called flashover, where the whole room eventually ignites and would go through the windows. And that is flashover of a room. How quickly it can happen. Okay, so that was just a quick understanding so you can have some greater respect and viewpoint for fire and why we have fire protection. So inside of a building, you have building construction that we need to be aware of. So you have firewalls. Firewalls are typically used to separate buildings or to separate different portions of buildings based upon the construction. Okay, those are independent walls that stand firm in between two different types of buildings. Then you have fire and smoke barriers. Those are walls inside of buildings that are part of the overall construction, but are built to be fire resistant. The picture you can see here, we have a 2-hour fire barrier wall. We have pipes coming through the wall. All have been fire stopped. We have a beam up top, which has been sprayed with fireproofing to keep the beam protected. Okay, and then we have stenciling on the wall to let everybody know in the future, if you puncture a hole in this wall, it has to be protected. Where do we have these? We have these in stairwells, building shafts, emergency response and equipment rooms to protect them, hazardous areas such that if a fire were to start there, it would stay. And then when we have to protect in place, they strategically place fire and smoke barriers around a building. These are all passive fire protection. When you have sprinkler systems or other things that activate, those are active fire protection systems. But how we build our buildings is called passive fire protection. And then along the exterior of a building, based upon how far apart buildings are, we want to limit the exterior building exposures. So we limit the number of openings and we require certain separation distances between buildings. And now around the outside of the building. But the outside, you have to give fire department access to your building. You can't block off a large portion of your building because then the fire department can't do their job. So we have vertical fire department access where you are worried about how they can get up into a building. Okay. I don't believe you guys have too tall of buildings in this project, but it is something to be aware of. Fire department has to have vertical access. And then you have ground fire department access where you have limiting access around your building. This is a fire department access road where they can pull their trucks in, come in, and then they will have access to the back of the building. And then you have your public street. You want to minimize the amount of hose lay that they have to do in order to get water onto the outside of a building.
Again, thank you for allowing me to spend some time with you today. But so when we talk about and start down this process of emergency management, we're really talking about processes and procedures. And it's all about collaborating, communicating, coordination, all surrounding prevention, mitigation, response, and recovery. And that goes for any and all types of disasters, not just fires, but any type of disaster has those four components to emergency management. And all of those pieces and parts go to make up what we truly think about and describe as the emergency management process. It's a never ending circle or process, as you see, kind of dictated by the circle there. So it's something we're always talking about and re-engaging on in that component. So when we talking about creating an emergency preparedness plan, there's all kinds of things that we have to take into account. Fires are just one of the things that could create a bad day for us. So we have to be prepared for that. Any of those disasters, if you will, can overwhelm us as a community, us as an organization, or even our families, depending upon what's going on. So we need to be prepared in advance. And by doing that, we hopefully keep our people safe, whether that be our employees or the people that are coming to our building, et cetera. Emergency preparedness, really talks about staying in business, continuity of operations. If you have a really bad fire, can we do things that prevent the fire, prevent, like Eric has talked about, the amount through sprinklers example, the impact. We do the same concept with emergency management. Think about all the other reasons that we might put plans in place. And really what we want is a comprehensive plan that goes what we refer to as all hazards approach. So everything from natural disasters to violent threats can be included in that plan, not just a fire, not just the hurricane or whatever it might else be. So how do we plan for what? What do we plan for? How do we plan for? Well, first we got to figure out what we want to plan for. What is the risk? What for whether for the building that we're talking about and helping to design, helping to manage on a daily basis? What are the risks to that buildings in that area? So we have to identify different risk. We have to identify how often it might occur. If it's you've heard of maybe a 100-year floodplain or a 500-year floodplain, you're still at risk for a flood. It's just hopefully less frequent. We also have to figure out preparedness and what we have in terms of what would help us in the preparedness aspects. How prepared are we? Do we have a sprinkled building? Do we have good connections and good water supply? Do we have on the flood side? Do we have sandbags or snow shovels or whatever there might be in that component? And have we trained our people to utilize those pieces and parts? So just having a snow shovel, if you will, and not having ever trained anyone to use it isn't quite good enough. So they have to be trained as part of that process, not just have the assets themselves. And then what is the impact? What if we had this bad day, whatever the bad day was? If how bad would it be? Could it be to the point we shut down our business completely, or is it just going to make a small inconvenience kind of thing? Active shooter is unfortunately something that's probably going to shut us down for a while. But a small snowstorm or a couple of flurries, eh, it's going to be an inconvenience. Very different in terms of impact to people, property, and the business itself in that component. So when we think about doing that risk assessment, we really need to think about truly looking internal and out. Not doing that in a bubble, if you will. So we start with, well, what is the risk, if you will, that is inherent to our building? Things. What do we have internally that cause risk for us? We have people. We have the cooking aspects, like Eric mentioned earlier. So we have potentials for fires. We have people coming in and out. It's it kind of thing there. Unfortunately, active shooter is something we need to think about. And then we start looking at the same thing in terms of our town, the locality around us. What does it offer? What is the risk that are there? Is there a big chemical plant just down the road, or things of that nature. Even at a state perspective, if I'm in North Carolina, my risk are very different than those of someone, say, down in Mississippi or Texas, or even up into Washington State. So just regionally, the risk change based upon climate and other things. And then there's the national risk. When we look at national risk, obvious things are wars and things that impact the nation itself as a whole. So we have to really think about that when we put all of our plans together. Hopefully, not a lot of national risk that we truly have to plan for, but we still have to take it into account. But if we don't do that kind of concentric circle concept in terms of our thoughts, in terms of what are we planning for, then we're not going to provide a good foundational plan and be a comprehensive plan and that incorporates all the different potentials that we need to think about. So why is an emergency preparedness plan important, and what should be in my plan? Mentors, this would be a great opportunity to take a few moments, pause the video, and have a discussion with your students and about what they might think would be a good plan, maybe where they're at or for the buildings they're helping to design. All right. So when we think about what is an emergency preparedness plan, we want to think about, making sure everyone knows what to do, whatever the bad day is, and how things are going to be interrupted. We want to make sure we're protecting lots of different types of people. Our employees, definitely, without our employees, we're not going to be viable. The people that are visiting our building, maybe not just from a client perspective, but also visitors themselves. Healthcare is a great example where you have both. And then even contractors, people that are in the building doing work for on the building, or for the organization. You need to make sure they're engaged and at least knowledgeable as well. And what should they do? Little things like when should I evacuate? When should I shelter or shelter in place? Do we have a lockdown process, and what does that mean when I hear that? How is my response at the employee level, or otherwise? What should I do, and how do we educate them? Most importantly, here, we are that melting pot in the United States. So how do you make sure you're partake making sure the processes and procedures are at least viable and knowledgeable for those with disabilities, and even those that don't speak English as a primary language, or even at all. So if someone has a disability, think of whether it be sight or otherwise, what are the different things? How would we need to put things in place from a planning perspective to deal with different types of emergencies, to make sure they get information quickly and readily, and understand what they need to do? Our plan also should outline who is in charge. The obvious concept, in a lot of ways, when we talked about, or Eric talked about fire, hey, the fire department's in charge, right? Well, that's easy. But when it's not a fire, who's in charge? When it's a spill in my building and from a hazardous material perspective, who's in charge? I may not be actually even engaging someone from outside. I may be able to take care of things on that component. Most importantly, who also needs to be contacted? Sometimes you need to contact external authorities like the police and fire departments. Others, maybe a corporate entity, maybe some different contractors or vendors that'll help us clean things up or get prepared in that component, all of which are pieces and parts that go into creating our plan. So a quick case study example. I know you're talking about a different area or venue type thing in terms of trying to build and think about, but let's think about a hospital. Here's a great example of Yale New Haven Hospital up in Connecticut. They're a large organization, 1,500 beds, that has all kinds of different services that they provide, and over 15,000 employees, not all of which are necessarily on site at one time, but at least half of which, if you think about, are on site at any given time. So we helped, Jensen Hughes has helped them to put together great plans related to their emergency management piece, how to activate, who's in charge, like we just talked about. How are we going to communicate? Not just the bells and lights and whistles that Eric covered, but all the other communications that you would need during an emergency. What does that look like? Are we going to send out text? Are we going to use the web? Are we going to have people literally just walking down the hallway to another department to tell them what's going on? And all of these different types of things go into that process and that plan. What kind of things impact? What were their risk? There's all kinds of stuff. Of course, mass casualty incidents, taking care of people that are hurt and injured, that's definitely something they're worried about. But when you have a multi-story building in a hospital, what happens when you lose an elevator? We got a plan for that. What happens when we lose a sewer or waste system? You know, I can bring water, bottled water in, but man, it's a whole lot of different process and plan when the sewer goes out. And even down to what if we have to evacuate the entire building? Unfortunately, there are definitely times we have to evacuate an entire building. Even in hospital, with the great construction that Eric mentioned and more that we put in place to help provide for their safety, those patients' safety, there are times when we actually have to evacuate hospitals. And so, how do we do that? And that planning process that goes behind it is definitely a big part of our emergency management plans and things that we should think about when we look at other organizations and instances. So what did we do? Just what we just talked about. We went in and did the risk assessment. Who are we worried about? What are the things that are we're going to available to us and those in the organization? And we helped them start to identify their chain of command, who's in charge concepts. We started doing some training, and most importantly, we did exercises. We do a lot of exercises with that specific hospital, even down to like 3 or 4 a year when we talk about different things. And we've actually exercised, my example of the full building evacuation. We take parts of that hospital, a whole wing, if you will, or a whole department, and we will actually evacuate simulated patients to help, make sure that if it ever has to happen, they're ready. So what we ended up with was a comprehensive all hazards plan that thought about not just fire, not just active shooter, not just mass casualty incidents, et cetera, but all kinds of different things based upon the risk that the organization had. All of those can be flexible and scalable. We can make them as big as we need to, or we can keep them small. If it's a small spill, we don't need 15, 100 people coming. 3 or 4 people might be fine. Most importantly, everything is very quickly referenced. If the staff, the leadership, and more don't know what to do and they can't find it because this is not what they do it on a daily basis, it's not going to be value add. So we want to make sure it's quickly referenced and easy to read and easy to understand. The good or bad part for that hospital is that their plan has been implemented over 30 times due to different types of disasters just in the last 2 years. And that doesn't even include the big one, the big issue that everybody would probably think about at this time. So that's all kinds of other instances where their plans has been put in place. But most important for them, it really serves as a model for other hospitals. So they are a large system, just like a lot of the systems in North Carolina. And so their plan became the base plan for lots of different hospitals throughout Connecticut that they own. And so that everybody throughout their entire system starts with a good foundational understanding and approach, and consistency in that approach. So when we think about and talk about emergency management planning, it goes through all hazards, everything from, I call it, from all from active shooter to volcanoes, if you will, in the alphabet, and more. So when we think about putting together plans to help become better or be better or prevent or and able to respond, what I want you to think about are two terms: is being one, resilient. How do we bounce back? How do we, get back to normal after bad days happen? The example of the fire that he mentioned earlier. But also think about what can we do to be more anti-fragile. When I say anti-fragile, that's based upon how do we learn from incidents so that we don't break. Hey, we had a bad fire. Did we have a sprinkler system in that area? No. Let's put a sprinkler system in it so that we don't have near the issues if it ever happens again next time. If we, other things of that standpoint. So we always look at whatever happened during an incident to help inform, update, and improve our emergency management plans. So first and foremost, we would rather not happen. So if I can prevent the issue, that's awesome. If I can put the sandbags up and not let water in, that's the best plan I've got. But how do we get back to normal if it still happens? By putting plans together and doing the training, the education, and even exercises. What we do with our staff, our leadership, and really those in our community is we start to provide confidence and competence. Confidence in our plans, confidence in our abilities, and confidence that we're going to be there to help them, and competence that we can do it. We know how to do it. We've practiced this through exercise. Confidence without, competence is nothing more than being cocky. But competence without confidence is I know what to do, but I'm scared to pull the trigger. I'm scared to pull that fire alarm. And so both of those independently can be a little dangerous, but both of them combined really create a great plan for you, your organization, the people you serve, and even the community around you. Lastly, of course, why do we do emergency planning is because there's a lot of organizations out there that actually accredit or create compliance aspects for different types of organizations. Healthcare is a perfect example of that. They're mandated to do emergency management planning. And so, by doing these things, that helps us become successful, meet those accreditation and compliance checks, and again, make our people safe, more safe, secure, and resilient at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you, Bobby. So to kind of bring all that together, we kind of wanted to walk through real quick, just in general. So with fire protection wise, um, to help you with your projects. What systems should be in your buildings? We talked about suppression of a fire. So if you do have a fire, you need to suppress it, right? In your case, you're building a community center, one during regular hours. You don't want to have an emergency take down that building or endanger any of the occupants that are in it. But it's also your shelter for when something bad happens on the coast where people need to come to you because you've built it to be strong. So when that happens, what do you have in your building? You want to make sure your building stays the safe location, right? So what types of fire alarm systems should be worried about, right? You have sprinklers, you have fire alarm systems. When you look at your water, what type of water do you have available to you, and whether or not you might need a fire pump to make even more water to have a higher pressure from that water. Or if you don't have enough water, do you need to have a tank on your site? Okay, these are all different questions about what types of systems you should have from a fire alarm and sprinkler point of view. And then um, what type of construction should you have? You want it to be a strong, resilient building. I don't know your sites, but if you have any close buildings close by, you want to make sure that a fire next to you doesn't endanger your building so that you've got enough space and separation between those different areas. Internally, should you have different compartments? If you've got a large assembly area within your community center that might have housed a large amount of people at one time, well, if there's a fire and it's going to take a little bit longer for all those people to get out, should you compartmentalize? Should you make fire barriers in your building to say that we're going to be safer by doing this? Do you have any hazardous materials or any emergency equipment that all needs to be protected? So I build a compartment around it. And then outside, make sure the fire department can get to your buildings. Make sure you've thought of providing them hydrants. Make sure you've looked at how much access you have around your building. And are you too close to any shrubbery or exterior influences that if there was a outside fire, it could then endanger your building? So a bunch of things to think about. There's definitely more, but that should get you well on your way. And Bobby, if you have a few on emergency management.
Sure. Related to your community centers, think about the emergencies that might be planned for. How would you address those? What are the risks? My examples earlier, is the building anywhere close to a floodplain? Could we do things to decrease that risk? How are we going to deal with the risk of that flood? Emergency power, during bad days, power goes off. Do we still need power? Do we need to put generators in and things of that nature? And even down to the example of what happens if the water fails. So, how are we going to do that? What are the risks we need to plan for? Who's going to be involved in that process? Who should be in charge? What's that chain of command look like? Who do we need to call when bad days happen? And how are we going to communicate? Both external, meaning making calls, et cetera, but also internal. Eric mentioned, some of the strobes and things from a fire perspective. But if we're just trying to get messages out internally to a large group of people, do we have PA systems? Are we going to utilize text messaging? What kind of communication processes are there or should be? And how are we going to utilize them during emergencies? And what is the plan for each of these types of issues and risk that we're going to do in this center to make sure that the folks that are there, whatever time of day it is, are safe and secure. And so that we can put together good plans, making sure that we continue to operate the building, but again, most importantly, taking care of the people.
All right. And with that, thank you very, very much. I hope you guys learned a few things. It was and interesting. We definitely enjoyed presenting to you and preparing this for you. Thank you all very much. Best of luck with your projects, and till next time.